and we are into the month of October, which means we are in the last quarter of our Bible reading for 2024.
Making the quarter turn towards home.
Yeah, and we wrapped up in September the
themes,
the big themes that we were doing. Let me throw that slide back up there. You guys can look at the themes we worked on, essentially, basically from February to September.
Yep.
And as we worked our way through the prophets, just looking for these big ideas that come up again and again in the prophetic books, and we've done all of those that we wanted to do. And so for these last 3 months, what we're doing has kind of been the other piece of the reading this year, and that is finishing up our read through the minor prophets. So we've got Habakkuk left, and Jonah left, and Malachi left, which will be what we'll be reading for the last 3 months of 2024. And here in October, we're looking at Habakkuk, and what we thought we would do is just kind of work through these books with you, maybe give a little more concentrated attention on the prophet itself, since we've finished with the themes. But we don't want you to forget about the themes, and
practice using them now as we read some of these books.
It is an opportunity as we read through to start looking through the themes. So Habakkuk's got 3 chapters. So what we thought we'd do for October is introduce the book here in week 1, and then we'll take a chapter per week through the rest of the month and go through the chapters and look for the themes, and as well as some things that we can do with the different prophets. So thinking about Habakkuk this month, I love Habakkuk.
Yep, one of my favorites.
We should probably introduce a little bit the time and circumstances under which this book was written.
Right.
We're dealing with a prophet to Judah. And we're dealing with sort of pre-captivity stuff.
And even kind of before pre-Babylon, Habakkuk, probably dates to roughly the late 600s.
Okay.
Because part of the plot point in the book, in his conversation with God, is God foretells the rise of the Babylonians. And Habakkuk's not real happy about that. But the point is the Babylonians have not supplanted the Assyrians yet. And so, but most likely soon. And so we usually date this book to kind of the late 600s.
So the important thing there, a couple of important things there in terms of the background of the book. Number one, the people are wicked.
Well, yes. So starting point there, yes. Habakkuk is scandalized with how wicked, not just the world is, but how wicked Jerusalem is, how wicked the people of God are.
Yeah, but even broader than that, Israel and Judah both had been exceedingly wicked for a long, long time.
Right.
And one of the things I think is important for this period of history is that Israel has already been dealt with by Assyria, which kind of should have become this object lesson for Judah. This is how the road ends if you take this path. And evidently Habakkuk's demonstrating that they have not learned the lesson from all
of that. And that's, of course, God will later prophets as he gets close, later chronologically, as it gets close to actually destroying them with Babylon, will actually make that point. You saw what I did to the northern kingdom, and yet you didn't change, which makes your sin even worse in the sense of, not only have you done what you've done, but you've done it in the face of this, what should have been for you a warning shot when I destroyed Samaria and the northern kingdom. And so you do know that I will keep these covenant curses. And yet here we are.
And so you would think that Judah would have picked up on this.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like when you're a little kid and your older sibling messes up and gets in major trouble. You're thinking, don't ever do that.
Right.
They didn't get it. They didn't learn the lesson.
Or vice versa, when you did it and then your parents come down on you with, didn't you see what happened?
Yeah,
when,
Exactly. So the thing I like about Habakkuk is he's not happy about the fact that things are so bad. And he actually does, I think, what people often do when things are bad is, kind of looks to the heavens and said, why aren't you doing something about this? So one of the things I like about that is that we see the prophet kind of venting his frustration. And at least in part it's frustration God directed. Like,
sure,
you see this.
Yeah.
Why aren't you doing something about it? Something I think that probably all of us from time to time feel.
Right.
And something that I think unbelievers sometimes use as an argument against God.
Right.
If there is a God, Why hadn't something been done about this?
So that's the interesting thing about Habakkuk in general is, what makes it unique among the prophets and the minor prophets. Just like Jonah is going to be unique next month because he's actually the prophetic book is not so much his oracles, it's the story of the prophet.
Yeah.
Habakkuk is just a little bit further upstream from that in that this is not so much God calling a prophet to go, bring oracles of judgment or calls to repentance to his people. The whole driver of this book is the prophet has a question about God's justice and how God's running the world. Why aren't you doing something about the sin of your people? And that literally drives the messages in the book by and large is the prophet's own I don't want to call it crisis of faith. That might be a little bit overstated. Though the most famous verse in the book comes from chapter 2, because Paul will use it and James will use it, that the just one, the righteous one, will live by faith. That's part of God's answer to Habakkuk. But the bottom line is the book, the driver in this book is not so much the sins of the people. The driver of this book in these 3 short chapters is the prophet's own confusion and frustration over how God is carrying out this judgment, why he's not doing more about evil in the world.
And maybe that accounts, at least in part, for the preservation of this particular prophet's perspective, because it is such a human perspective on things that go on down here sometimes, and that is that we don't know what God's up to.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like this is the way it ought to be done.
Right.
And it's almost kind of like the potter clay argument, right?
Yeah.
The clay is telling the potter how he ought to be doing this.
Right.
And there is an absurdity about that, but it's a real human struggle. I mean, we imagine how things ought to be run if there is a God and he's powerful and he is in charge.
Yeah.
He ought to be running this thing better.
That's right.
And so one of the things I love about Habakkuk is he really taps into that human frustration that I think from time to time all of us feel.
Yeah.
And sort of gives us a broader view of that.
That's right. And I think especially, it's only 3 chapters, so you can really afford to read this book once a week.
Right.
And so maybe especially this first week as you're reading it, and you're reading it through maybe for the
Whole
first
thing.
time for you. Yeah, you read the whole thing. At the 30,000 foot level for our first week, and even as we want to go chapter by chapter later, the arc that you're going to see in this book is the prophet's frustration and questions and wonderings about God, and the movement towards by chapter 3, his renewed confidence. So the movement in this book is from frustration and confusion to a firmer faith, through these 3 chapters. And so what you can do, one of the useful things I like about this book is it's kind of a roadmap for not, the spiritual maturity is not denying that we have doubts or questions or frustrations. There is a place for the person of faith to strengthen their faith by admitting and acknowledging and casting these things before God. And then you follow, literally, Habakkuk is almost a roadmap for how we move from frustration and confusion to a renewed confidence in the Lord's running of the world. This book is a 3-chapter roadmap for what that process looks like. But the important part to your point, David, is we don't start by denying the confusion, the frustration, the doubts. We start by acknowledging them and confessing them to the Lord.
I think that's so important because I think I've encountered a lot of people over the years who have experienced tragedy.
Yeah.
And they are very disturbed because they have these feelings of frustration with God. Maybe a loved one died. Maybe a loved one died tragically. Like a young person dies in an auto accident or died after suffering a terrible disease, and they're having those questions. Why did this happen? Why did God let this happen? Why didn't God heal? I prayed about this, and they almost feel guilty for having the questions.
Right.
And so one of the things I like about Habakkuk is it. Let me be very careful about my language here. Normalizes those feelings. It says this is part of the human predicament.
Well, it tells us what to do with them, as opposed to either denying them or giving into them.
Yeah,
it shows us what to do with them,
or to say, people feel this.
Yeah,
and it's not where you want to live.
No,
but it is seasons through which
it's going to happen,
so that you don't think you're a bad person because something happened and you were frustrated with God. Why is it so? Why is it this way? Lots of people have felt that way down through history. And as you said, here is the way we deal with that. The other thing that I think is important to be looking for as you go through the book are kind of these prophetic themes. And just to anticipate that, if we know that the prophet is going to be complaining about what God has allowed to happen, that we're going to be encountering sin.
Yeah.
And remember, that's one of the themes we looked at, the rebellion of God's people.
Yeah.
And I think you see that front and center in Habakkuk. That's what he's not happy about. This evil is going on, and it's one of the things the prophets are writing about all the time.
Well, and even along that, it's also in one sense, and then the verse version of even the original thing we start with, which is God's control over history. In other words, God, if you are running history, why is it turning out this way? Why aren't you doing something about it? So that's the paradox too, is sometimes these things can show up kind of in their inverse forms, where it's rather than God asserting I am in control, the whole reason Habakkuk is turning to God with questions is because since you are in control, why is this not being dealt with?
Yeah. So it's an opportunity, especially as you do that first read and you're trying to make sense of the material that's in here, thinking about the big themes that we've been talking about, looking for God's control of history, or looking for the complaint about sin, or the warning about judgment and justice that's going to be wrapped up into this. It kind of gives you, it's kind of like a spiritual scavenger hunt, right? Kind of gives you something to be looking for as you read through.
Yeah, practice what you've learned.
And then as we go through chapter by chapter during the month of October, you can kind of knit those ideas together. And hopefully that's going to help us understand the prophets better. So for week one, let's be committed to sitting down. It won't take very long, will it?
No, 3 chapters.
Yeah,
but you want to read well. I mean, but it's not. They're not long chapters. This is not a long book.
You don't have to commit 3 hours to this.
No,
okay,
no.
Commit some time to just sort of reading through the whole thing together, and then stick with us throughout the month of October as we work our way through the book.